Hello and welcome back to another Lord Pack discussion video, and yes, I know it's not Skaven and Empire, don't hurt me please. Guys, we've got till September, okay, so don't worry, we'll make that Lord Pack, video at some point. But today we are talking about the Bold and the Brass. I was going to do the Sisters and the Sire, but I decided on this one instead because, it's not to say that I don't think that Lord Pack is possible, it's just I felt this one was really cool and I felt like it, might fit a little bit better, but still it has its problems. But I'll possibly mention those other Lords a little bit later into the video. So this Lord Pack is between the Wood Elves and the Beastmen. Yes, DLC for DLC, but these guys need some love too. And in my opinion, CA should not just give up on these Game 1 races just because they made the mistake of not giving them 4 Legendary Lords and a full roster in their DLC. So let's start with the Wood Elves. Now, Erlof the Brave was not my first choice, as I was going to talk about the Sisters of Twilight. However, the reason I chose Erlof over them is because the Sisters are 2 Lords in 1. Now, that's fucking cool, but for CA, that's not reusable. For example, if you take a look at the other Lords in the game, for example like Karl Franz, they reused his model's rig to make Boris, and the Sisters would have to be completely remade from scratch with no reuse potential. Now, I know we have Skarsnik and Gobbler, so it is possible for these Lords to be made from scratch, but these Lords also can choose from 2 different mounts, so once again, it's more work for CA that can't really be reused in any way. But that's just my opinion, and if we do get the Sisters, I ain't complaining. Now, Erlof the Brave was not always a hero. He was a lordling who would not hunt anything that he knew could fuck him in return, a coward, but basically one hunt he got thrown from his horse and separated from his fellow companions except for Skaren, his loyal hawk, unlike his mates. But as he wandered lost, he came to a strange glade where he saw a demon about to get down and dirty with an elf maiden, and he could not stand by and let this happen, so they decided to charge the demon and stab it. And he would have been dead if his loyal hawk had not scratched out the eyes of this demon, and then Erlof managed to duck underneath the claws of this demon and thrust his spear into its heart. Turns out he was dreaming, and that the elf maiden was actually a goddess that told him he was going to amount to great things, but his mates took the piss out of him when he woke up and told him, but Erlof knew that what happened was real, and from that day on, he had courage and was fearless. There's my example of a lore video, okay? I'm up there with some of the best YouTubers when it comes to lore videos, as you can clearly tell. So, as for starting locations, this is where it gets kind of annoying. Now, Wood Elves only really have one starting location, which is Atholoran, which already has 2 Lords starting there, Orion and Durfu. So, throwing a third in there does nothing except to give us a new Lord for the Mortal Empires campaign and multiplayer. So, if we were going to have a Wood Elf Lord in the Vortex campaign, the best and really only place we can put them is the Camp of Orion. I think that's how you say it, I could be wrong. I know the problem straight away, and even if we're not talking lore-wise, it has the problem of only having 1 settlement, which of course for most lords usually have 4, 1 to start in and 3 to conquer or confederate. But for this camp, it's just 1 little treehouse in the middle of the Southlands. But let's just hypothesize for a second that CA would consider this. They could make up some lore like they did with the Vampire Coast about Erlof on a quest in the world for roots, and also could maybe add 1 or 2 Wood Elf settlements there, right next to the camp, giving a bit more of a province to start with, and of course this would be the first legendary lord to start in the Southlands, giving new gameplay for those races there, and of course for the Wood Elves, having a lord that starts in the Southlands would be great, because then you're starting somewhere else than fucking Atholoran. The second location is what would tie into the DLC a little bit, which is the Great Forest. It's a bit hard to tell on this map, but basically where it says the Wastelands is where the Great Forest is. Now, after the War of the Beard, there are Wood Elves who are still here, and this could be another starting location. Now, of course, the problem with this is that it's not in the Vortex campaign, but this DLC that I'm making up is 2 old world races, so I'm basing this on the fact that this DLC could be for the Mortal Empires campaign and not the Vortex campaign as well, so it's a bit of back and forth. But Erlof starting here would be something different from Atholoran, giving us a new starting location. Granted, it's not far from the other 2 and it's probably not lore friendly, but it's something different which could tie into the Beastmen part of the DLC. Moving on to Erlof in battle, I think a lot of people, and myself included, feel that Wood Elves need a duelist lord. We have Durfu as the caster and Orion as the tank, so Erlof playing a duelist lord role would be a really nice addition to the Wood Elves army. Right now in Wood Elves competitive you only see Glade Lords, and Erlof is basically a better Glade Lord and wouldn't be sniped as easy as the other 2 legendary lords. Airloft's abilities are Boldest of the Bold, which basically makes him unbreakable when he's not part of a unit, which in Total War Warhammer is always. Favour of the Goddess gives him a ward save, so some damage resistance with a cooldown. And lastly, Skeran, the Eye, basically lets him select a unit and inflict damage. However, in Total War Warhammer, maybe it should be a debuff, something similar to like trophy heads. On the Wood Elves roster side, this is where new Wood Elf Lords are more likely as a FLC Lord than a DLC, simply because the Wood Elves roster is pretty much complete, other than a few units, and Glade Guard, Riders, and Deepwood Scout variants. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Zote. It is a very ancient monster, one of legend that lives in the deepest parts of the forest, wanting not to connect with the outside world. But basically sometimes they would help the elves destroy goblins, but I think they'd be just as happy to help destroy beastmen as well. Now, I can't really find anything about these guys on tabletop, but personally I think I know how they should play. Basically filling the same role as a Shaggoth, anti-large, armor piercing with magical attacks. Basically, right now, the Wood Elves don't have any anti-large cav or monsters, so this could really fit that role nicely. Maybe costing about 1,500 gold, an expensive unit, but can really go toe-to-toe with Shaggoths and Carnosaurs. Next, Forest Chariots. I don't know why these guys aren't already in-game. It makes perfect sense for a unit like this to be in-game already. But for the Wood Elves, they never really can go one-on-one in an infantry fight, since only one of their infantry units has armor-piercing damage. And all of them have no armor, so they rely on missiles and cavalry to do the lifting. So chariots could only help that and make their roster a little bit better at dealing with, heavy infantry focused armies. Lastly, great stags for lords and heroes would be really nice. Elven steeds and unicorns are a bit meh, since all they do is really give you speed and maneuverability, but basically no defense or armor. So for casters and glade lords, having great stags would offer, of course, less speed, but perhaps a bit more melee defense and armor. Basically, sort of a midpoint between elven steeds and great eagles and dragons, because it's quite expensive to bring a great eagle or a dragon. So a great stag could sort of fit nicely in that middle spot, offering a bit more of a defense than the more expensive options. Anyway, that's my Wood Elves done. Let's move on to Taurox the Brass Bull, also known as the Slaughterhouse, the Blood Beast, and the Brazen One. I was going to talk about Goros Warhoof, the Primarch of Centaurs. I had a little 40k joke there, if you get it, that doesn't matter. And to be honest, he could fit here in this DLC just as much, but the Bold and the Sire does not sound as cool in my opinion. But basically, Goros Warhoof is basically a Centaur legendary lord who already has a unit in the game associated with him, which is the Sons of Goros. So they need their daddy in game, and it would make sense for him to actually be a legendary lord in the game, because of course, a Centaur legendary lord would be a really cool addition to the game. But moving back to Taurox, this Minotaur chieftain is responsible for a trail of destruction all across the lands of the Great Forest and the Empire. Taurox at one point went berserk and had a vision of blood and corpses stuck in his mind, basically a vision that caused him to rampage and kill everything in sight. But eventually exhausted, he collapsed into a river of blood of all the corpses that he'd basically been killing. But the Chaos Gods were like, nah, you still got some more killing to do, and Taurox was reborn in a full body of metal, so that he would never tire and never have a moment of respite from that rage that consumed him. So for starting locations, the first is somewhere near the Great Forest, since that's where in Taurox's lore he laid waste. Now there are problems. We already have Morgur the Shadowgave starting in the Nordlands, which is quite close, so perhaps Taurox could start either south near Bretonnia or the Empire. Now I know that's a bit of a squish, but if we're going to have a Wood Elf Lord starting in the Great Forest, it would fit perfectly, since these two would be right next to each other and of course tie into the Lord pack. Now, of course, this is for Total War Warhammer 2, so if we had to do it for the Vortex campaign, a logical place would be Nagaroth. There is a Beastman faction that does start there already, so he could start in the Deadwood or to the west in the mountains. Now, of course, this would mean that the lore pack makes no sense, since basically it would be nowhere near the Wood Elves, but for example, instead it could be a Beastmen versus Dark Elves lore pack with Malus versus Taurox, so it's still possible in a certain way. As for Taurox in battle, I'm going to take reference from SFO Grimhammer mod, since I really think they nailed down what he should be like. First of all, of course, he's tanky. Base 140 armor, since he's made of metal, anti-infantry, armor piercing, of course, as well. But as for his abilities, I really like what they did and have basically given him. On the tabletop, Torix would not really die unless you rolled a 6 to hit and a 6 to wound, which, you know, really didn't happen unless he's facing a character with a weapon that ignores armor, so it's very rare that he ever died. So on the mod, they gave him the Brass Ball, which basically is, whilst he's in combat, gives him melee defense and damage resistance going up over time, but has Rampage in return, which fits his sort of bloodlust, which I think really makes sense for his character. Another ability would be his axes. Now, these are rune axes that do have magical capabilities, so in this mod they've given it to him as an ability that you basically pop, and it gives armor piercing and weapon damage. I'd also like to see a melee attack in there, since I think he should be hitting everything at the same time as well, which also does magic and fire attacks. This meaning that whatever he's going up against, if it's a lord, infantry or monster, it's going to be taking damage. And finally, we move on to one of the biggest parts of the lore pack, Beastmen units. If there's one roster in Total War Warhammer that's unfinished and needs love, it's this one. So let's start with Gorgons. Oh yes, this is the one that's been all over the forums. You know who you are, Gotrek. But Beastmen right now really lack anti-large, and I really want an anti-large one-entity monster, and I feel the Gorgon could fit this role beautifully. Now on tabletop, these guys have a few nice abilities, and could really go toe-to-toe with a lot of units if they hit them and actually, you know, you micromanage them well. But in Total War Warhammer, it would have anti-large, armor piercing, no armor. That was one of the key things about this unit. It had no armor in tabletop, or no armor save. It also would have regen, but however only in combat, which is its strength from flesh ability. And frenzy, of course, so it basically has like a bloodlust ability, or blood rage I believe it is, where, you know, obviously it would have rampage or frenzy. I guess filling a similar role to the Hell Pit, but a unit that would fit an anti-large spot for the Beastmen, which is really, really needed at this point. Whilst we're on the subject of big units, let's talk about the Jabberslife. This thing is basically when you get the creature from the movie The Thing and get Nurgle's big green penis to create this monster. Now, the Jabberslife on tabletop has some really nice abilities, but it's not as strong as you might think, and really needs to be a unit that gets support when it fights, you know, anything else. In Total War Warhammer, these guys would have armor piercing. They do have fly as well. Looks hard to believe because they're quite a fat bastard, but really they can't fight anything. But maybe CA could make it so that, you know, it is a monster that can go toe-to-toe with, like, dragons, giving Beastmen some air control, and of course, you know, being able to deny Karl Franz when he comes in for those Lord snipes. Other traits would be poison, always a nice debuff, of course. The Jabberslife also has an ability called Aura of Madness, which in Total War Warhammer would be minus leadership to nearby units, something similar to the Carabas' Howl ability, which when combined with poison could make it a really good support unit that flies around and comes down to poke with other units that are basically getting attacked, getting that leadership down and poison on the enemy, and then getting out of there to help, you know, somewhere else while flying around. One of it is the Slife Tongue, I believe. This is most likely would be in the form of a breath attack, but if we do get it, I'll be surprised because it's kind of like a tongue attack, not really a breath attack. Lastly, Spurting Bile Acid would be damage to nearby units that if, you know, basically when the Jabberslife gets hit, it would basically do damage to the units that are hitting it, which would be really nice, and we don't really have anything like this in Total War Warhammer, and should be something that is seen in other units with a similar trait. Oh my god, it's literally been 20 minutes since the last time I've been able to talk. There are some fucking bikers outside my house trying to make as much noise as possible, really trying to piss me off, and it seems they're revving their bikes and driving past my house as soon as I press the record button, which is really fucking annoying. Anyway, other units that I would love to see is a Doom Ball with Marked Minotaurs. Basically, these guys would be just completely lawnmowers. I mean, the Doom Ball will of course provide leadership to all Minotaur units in the roster, but Marked Minotaurs, I'd be interesting to know if these guys would be better than the Butchers of Kalangard, but they'd be obviously very expensive in their own right. Lastly, and this is a bit of my own preference, is I would love to see Bestegors with Halberds. Now, I know we've already got Korok's Man Rippers, but they are... Oh, for fuck you, bikers. But there are just not enough on their own, okay? We need a non-Regiment of Renown unit that fills that anti-large armor-piercing infantry role. Fuck you, bikers. Fuck you and your Harley fucking Davidsons. Sorry about that. You can imagine how annoying it is when you press record and then your sound gets overtaken by an engine with wheels. Anyway, this is where this video is going to end. Sorry for taking so long to get another video out. Life just happens and I wish I didn't have to deal with life. But anyway, I know a lot of people have been wanting some Beastmen and Wood Elves love, and me included. So let me know if you agree with this or you disagree. I love the comments and I read every one, so please, you know, keep sending them. Next, I promise, we'll be Skaven and Empire unless something else comes up. But we're getting very, you know, ever so close to September, so we will have our answer soon. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.